A
Keep
sandstorm
pushing.
swallowed the
We
desert.
have to move
A
fast.
single gunshot vanished
I've
into
almost
the
got
wind,
you.
and beneath the sand, a woman was still breathing. A U.S. Navy SEAL on the run stopped his truck, dug with his bare hands, and pulled her back from being buried alive. Seconds later, corrupted police lights cut through the storm, and the hunt began. Drones in the sky, snipers on the highway, blood in the sand. A wounded war dog tearing down enemies in silence. A man fighting not for glory, but to get the truth to the world. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about choosing to stand when walking away would be easier. If you believe one act of courage can collapse an entire system, subscribe to the channel, share this story, and stay with us, because the desert remembers those who refuse to disappear. The desert was swallowed by a sandstorm, the sky bruised amber and black, wind screaming across Nevada's empty basin like something alive. Lucas Hale stood half-buried in grit beside his parked pickup, broad shoulders squared against the gale, his tall, muscular frame moving with the economy of a man trained to waste nothing. Not breath, not motion, not thought. At 34, Lucas carried the physical signature of a U.S. Navy SEAL, 6'2", dense muscle carved by years of saltwater, steel decks, and war zones, skin tanned and weathered, cut by old scars that never quite faded, dark brown hair cropped short in regulation style, a jawline sharp enough to look carved rather than grown. His eyes were steel gray, alert even in chaos, the kind that never truly rested, shaped by deployments where hesitation meant death. He wore civilian clothes now, sand-colored jacket, tactical boots, worn jeans, but discipline clung to him like a second skeleton. Years earlier, an extraction gone wrong in Mosul had cost him 2 teammates. The investigation cleared him, but the weight never left. Since then, Lucas trusted preparation over luck, silence over noise, and his dog over most men. Rex stood at his side, a Belgian Malinois nearing 7 years old, lean and powerful, sable coat streaked with black, ears erect despite the wind, eyes burning with focused intelligence. Rex was not a pet. He was a military working dog, trained for tracking, apprehension, explosives detection, and silent assault. His muzzle bore faint gray at the edges, earned honestly. He waited for commands, but also for permission to think, a balance forged through years of combat beside Lucas, where each had saved the other's life more than once. The gunshot came muffled, nearly erased by the storm. A dull crack swallowed by wind and sand. Rex's head snapped toward the sound instantly, body lowering, muscles coiling. Lucas felt it before he heard it. An instinctual tightening behind the ribs, the internal shift that separated civilians from soldiers. He raised a gloved hand, signaling Rex to hold, and listened. Another sound followed, not a shot this time, but something worse. A faint, strangled noise, human, desperate, carried briefly on the wind before vanishing. Lucas didn't hesitate. He adjusted his goggles, slung his rifle, and moved into the storm, boots biting into shifting ground, as Rex flowed beside him, silent as a shadow. They followed the sound for nearly 200 meters until Lucas saw disturbed earth ahead, fresh, uneven, the wrong color. He knelt, pressing his palm to the ground, feeling the hollow give beneath. He dug with his hands, fast and precise, sand tearing under his fingers until fabric appeared, then skin. A woman's face emerged, caked with dirt, blood dried along her temple where something blunt had struck her. She couldn't scream. A rag was stuffed deep in her mouth, her wrists bound with plastic zip ties. Her eyes were open, wild with terror, pupils blown wide as if she had already accepted death. Lucas cut the bindings in one motion and pulled the cloth free. She gasped, lungs burning, coughing sand and sobs into the storm. She was in her late 20s, maybe early 30s, dark hair tangled and matted, skin pale beneath grime. "You're safe," Lucas said, voice low, controlled, steady, the tone he used with wounded teammates under fire. "Breathe, slow." She tried to speak but could only whisper. Rex stood over her protectively, growling low, sensing danger long before it arrived. Lucas scanned the horizon, and that was when the headlights cut through the sand like twin knives. An engine roared closer, tires grinding gravel. Red and blue strobes bled into the storm. A sheriff's cruiser emerged, black and white paint barely visible beneath dust, followed by another vehicle. Lucas felt the situation snap tight like a drawn wire. He knew the look of a kill scene staged as law enforcement. He'd seen it overseas, men with badges instead of uniforms. He placed the woman behind him, pushing her gently toward cover behind a low rock shelf. "Stay down. Do not move unless I say," he ordered. She nodded, terror warring with trust. The cruiser doors opened. A man stepped out, Deputy Aaron Klein, though Lucas didn't know his name yet. A thick-set figure in his 40s, ruddy-faced, eyes nervous rather than righteous, hand already on his weapon. Klein was a career deputy, average height, thinning blonde hair, the kind of man who once wanted to protect people, but learned instead to obey the wrong orders. "Hands where I can see them!" Klein shouted, voice thin in the wind. Lucas raised one hand slowly, the other hovering near Rex's collar. "We found a woman buried alive," Lucas called back. "She needs medical help." The response was immediate gunfire. A round kicked sand inches from Lucas's boot. That was all the confirmation he needed. He dropped flat, rolled, and fired twice, controlled bursts, forcing Klein back behind the cruiser. Rex launched forward on a single hand signal, sprinting low, disappearing into the storm. Lucas moved laterally, using the terrain. Every step calculated, heart rate controlled, breathing locked into combat rhythm. Bullets cracked past him, one tearing through his jacket sleeve, heat grazing skin. He returned fire sparingly, aiming not to kill but to break contact. Rex reappeared in a blur of muscle and teeth, slamming into Klein from the side, jaws clamping onto his forearm, wrenching the weapon away. The deputy screamed, pain and panic dissolving whatever loyalty remained. The second vehicle reversed hard, tires spinning, retreating into the storm without another shot. Lucas called Rex back immediately, hands slicing the air. The dog released and returned, chest heaving, eyes locked on Lucas, awaiting the next command. Lucas secured the deputy, disarmed him, and tied his hands, then dragged him clear of the line of fire. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance now, more coming. Too many. Lucas crouched beside the woman again. "What's your name?" "Maya," she whispered, voice raw. They said no one would hear me." Lucas felt the cold settle in his chest. Not fear, but certainty. This wasn't an accident. This was a system. He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight. "They will hear you," he said. As they moved into the storm, Lucas knew with absolute clarity that this was no longer a rescue. It was a hunt. And from this moment on, they were the prey. Night fell hard over the Nevada basin, not as darkness, but as a living pressure, the sandstorm thinning into a cold, predatory wind that carried sound for miles and made every movement feel exposed. Lucas Hale moved only after sunset now, guiding Maya through dry washes and broken rock while the stars sharpened overhead like distant knives. His body, tall and powerfully built, moved with restrained precision despite the fatigue grinding into his muscles. Sweat dried instantly on his tanned skin, leaving salt streaks along the hard lines of his neck and jaw. The discipline etched into him by years in the Navy never loosened. Not even now. He rationed water by the milliliter, counted steps, checked angles, and kept his breathing slow enough to hear the desert speak. Rex padded ahead, nose low, black and sable coat blending into shadow, the Belgian Malinois muscles rippling beneath scarred fur. At 7 years old, he was no longer young, but age had sharpened him rather than dulled him. His eyes were bright, calculating, trained to read terrain, scent, and threat as one continuous language. Behind them, Maya stumbled less with every mile. She was still shaken, but strength was returning to her frame. She stood about 5'7", slender but resilient. Dark hair braided clumsily to keep it from her face. Olive-toned skin bruised along her arms and collarbone, where she had fought before being overpowered. Her eyes, once hollow with terror, now burned with contained fury, the kind born not of panic, but of survival. She spoke little, conserving breath, but when she did, there was clarity in her voice that Lucas recognized immediately. The voice of someone who knew exactly why they were being hunted. They did not need confirmation to know the manhunt had begun. It announced itself in sound and light. The low mechanical hum of drones swept the sky shortly after midnight, infrared models judging by the faint whine and the way Rex froze instantly, muscles locked, ears angled toward the vibration rather than the sound. Lucas cursed under his breath. Corrupt county funds could buy a lot of toys, but drones meant coordination. And coordination meant this wasn't just one dirty deputy trying to erase a mistake. He guided them into a narrow ravine, its walls rising jagged and uneven, rock still warm from the day's heat. From his pack, he removed components scavenged earlier: wires, pressure switches, a small quantity of industrial explosives stolen from an abandoned mining site. His hands worked automatically, fingers thick and scarred, yet impossibly precise, assembling a crude but effective directional charge. This was not something he enjoyed. It was something he had learned to do when options vanished. Years earlier, in Afghanistan, an IED had taken the legs of a young SEAL under Lucas's command. The memory surfaced now, unwanted but sharp, and hardened his resolve. He placed the charge carefully, angled toward the ravine entrance, then masked their scent with a chemical neutralizer. Rex watched him the entire time, eyes tracking every movement, awaiting instruction. Above them, a drone swept closer, its sensor grid invisible but palpable, like a searching gaze. Lucas timed it perfectly. When the drone dipped low enough, Rex launched upward from a ledge with explosive force, jaws snapping closed around the spinning chassis. A single shot cracked from somewhere unseen. Too quick, too accurate. The bullet struck Rex's flank. The drone shattered, sparks raining down as Rex hit the ground hard. The dog did not cry out, but the sound he made, low, shocked, cut deeper than any gunfire. Blood darkened the sand beneath him, soaking fast. Lucas was at his side instantly, hands pressing against the wound, voice steady even as something feral twisted in his chest. "Stay with me," he ordered softly. Rex's breathing was fast but controlled. His eyes never left Lucas's face. Maya tore fabric from her sleeve without being told and handed it over, hands shaking but determined. Lucas bound the wound tightly, efficient, ruthless with time. Sirens echoed in the distance now, and the thud of rotor blades followed soon after. Civilian helicopters retrofitted with door-mounted rifles, their silhouettes ugly against the stars. Lucas finished the bandage and helped Rex to his feet. The dog limped, favoring the injured leg, but when Lucas gave the hand signal to move, Rex moved. There was no hesitation. They traveled until dawn, skirting highways where corrupt deputies had established checkpoints, faces half hidden beneath tactical helmets, rifles slung with the confidence of men who believed themselves untouchable. Once, Lucas took a prone position on a ridge, his rifle steady against stone, and disabled a patrol vehicle with a single shot to the engine block, buying them time without taking a life. He did not kill unless there was no other choice. That rule had been forged in blood and regret, and he would not break it now. As the sun threatened the horizon, they reached a dried-out culvert and hid beneath it, the earth cool and damp. Maya finally spoke, voice low but urgent. She told Lucas about the data she carried, encrypted files hidden in a microdrive sewn into the lining of her jacket. She was an investigative analyst, not a journalist, contracted to audit infrastructure spending for the county. What she found instead were money trails leading to private prisons, drug routes disguised as construction contracts, and a list of deaths marked as accidents. The burial was meant to be permanent. Lucas listened without interruption, jaw tight, eyes scanning the desert beyond the culvert's mouth. He believed her instantly. He had seen this pattern before, in places where uniforms replaced laws. Above them, helicopters circled, and the hunt tightened. Rex rested his head against Lucas's boot, breathing shallow but steady, blood dried black along his fur. Lucas rested a hand on the dog's head, feeling the faint tremor beneath. He knew then that the line had been crossed beyond retreat. They were no longer running to survive the night. They were running to expose a system. And as the sun rose, pale and unforgiving, Lucas Hale made a quiet promise to the desert they would not disappear. The Red Canyon swallowed them before night fully arrived, its towering walls bleeding rust and shadow as the last light of dusk died overhead. And in that enclosed throat of stone, the world seemed to narrow to breath, heartbeat, and intent. Lucas Hale chose the canyon because it killed signals, bent radio waves into useless echoes, and forced any pursuer to come close enough to be touched. He moved first, shoulders squared despite the ache creeping into his joints, tall and broad-shouldered at just over 6 feet. His physique the kind forged not in gyms, but under rucksacks and recoil. His hair, once jet black, was cropped short and dusted with gray at the temples, his beard trimmed close, dark and rough, along a jawline cut sharp as the canyon rock itself. Years in the Navy had carved discipline into every angle of him, but it was the loss of men under his command, good men, young men, that had burned restraint into his bones. He fought now not with rage, but with control so absolute it looked like coldness. Behind him came Maya, quieter than before, eyes wide but no longer empty. She moved with care, favoring her ribs, her slender frame wrapped in a borrowed jacket that hung loose over narrow shoulders. Her dark hair had come partly undone, strands clinging to sweat-damp skin, but there was a new steadiness in her posture, a subtle lift of her chin, as if something inside her had aligned. Rex brought up the rear, limping but lethal, his black and tan coat smeared with dried blood and red dust, ears pricked, amber eyes alive with focused intelligence. At 7 years old, the Belgian Malinois bore scars along his muzzle and flank, silent testaments to years of special operations training. He had been shaped into a weapon, yes, but also into a thinking partner, able to read Lucas's smallest signals and act without sound or hesitation. The canyon floor narrowed, forcing them single file, and Lucas raised a clenched fist. Rex froze. Maya stopped a breath later, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. From somewhere behind them came the crunch of boots on gravel, careless and confident, followed by the low murmur of voices distorted by the canyon's acoustics. Lucas inhaled slowly, tasting iron and dust, then drew the knife from his thigh sheath. The blade was matte black, unadorned, its balance perfect. It had been with him through 3 deployments, and he trusted it more than most people. He placed his palm briefly against the canyon wall, feeling its warmth, grounding himself. Then he moved. The first man appeared around the bend with a rifle slung loose and his helmet unbuckled. A deputy by the look of him, mid-30s, broad but soft, the kind of body built by beer and bravado rather than endurance. He never saw Lucas. The knife slid in beneath his jaw and out again with surgical finality. Lucas guiding the body down so it didn't fall, easing it to the dirt as if laying a man to sleep. Rex was already gone, a shadow peeling away from the darkness, moving low and fast. The dog struck the second pursuer from behind, clamping onto the man's forearm, twisting him off balance without a sound. A muffled scream died as Rex adjusted his grip and Lucas finished it with a blunt strike to the temple. Maya watched, frozen, her mind rebelling against what her eyes reported. There was no shouting, no chaos, only swift, intimate violence carried out with terrifying efficiency. More figures poured into the canyon, their flashlights bobbing wildly as they realized something was wrong. Lucas fell back, drawing them deeper, his mind mapping angles and distances automatically. A tall man with a shaved head and thick reddish beard advanced too quickly, rage plain on his face. He swung a baton that cracked against Lucas's shoulder with bone-jarring force, and pain flared white-hot down Lucas's arm. He answered with his elbow, crushing the man's nose, then drove him backward into the rock wall and took his legs out from under him. A shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space, the bullet slamming into stone inches from Maya's head. She screamed despite herself and dropped to the ground, hands over her ears, the reality of war slamming into her like a physical blow. Rex reappeared through the dust, launching himself at the shooter's throat, teeth finding flesh, the man's rifle clattering uselessly to the ground. Another deputy rushed in, younger, thinner, eyes wide with fear rather than malice. Lucas disarmed him with a brutal efficiency that left the man sobbing and clutching a shattered wrist, alive but broken. The canyon became a blur of motion, breath, and blood. Lucas took a round through the meat of his shoulder, the impact spinning him into the wall, warmth spreading fast beneath his shirt. He gritted his teeth and kept moving, switching the rifle to his offhand without thought, firing controlled shots that disabled rather than killed, his training asserting itself even now. Rex took another hit, grazing his hind leg, and staggered, but he did not retreat. He planted himself between Maya and the chaos, snarling low, daring anyone to come closer. When it ended suddenly. The remaining pursuers fled, dragging their wounded, their confidence shattered along with their numbers. The canyon fell silent except for the ragged breathing of the survivors and the distant wind whispering over stone. Lucas slid down against the wall, blood soaking his sleeve, his face pale but composed. Maya crawled toward him, her hands trembling as she pressed them against his wound, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. She had seen violence before on screens, in reports and photographs, but this was close, personal, irreversible. She understood now what Lucas carried inside him, what Rex had been shaped to do, and the knowledge changed her. Rex limped over and leaned against Lucas's side, his body a warm, solid weight, tail giving a single exhausted thump. Lucas rested his forehead briefly against the dog's, eyes closed, drawing strength from the familiar presence. They had won the night, but at a cost. And as Maya looked at the blood on her hands and the men lying broken in the dust, she realized with a hollow ache that there was no going back to who she had been before the desert. War, she learned, was not loud. It was precise, merciless, and unforgettable. The abandoned military installation rose from the desert like a dead animal picked clean by time, its concrete bunkers half buried in sand and its rusted antennae clawing at a sky bruised purple by the coming night. Lucas Hale chose it because he understood places like this. They were built for war, forgotten by bureaucracy and honest in their decay. He stood at the perimeter fence for a moment, blood stiffening his sleeve where the bullet had torn through his shoulder, his tall, muscular frame rigid with pain, held in check by discipline rather than denial. At 34, Lucas carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of a career Navy SEAL, straight-backed even when wounded, movements economical, eyes constantly assessing angles and exits. His dark hair was matted with dust and sweat, his close-cropped beard shadowing a face cut with sharp planes and old scars, one faint line running from his cheekbone toward his ear, a souvenir from a mission years ago that had cost him a teammate and taught him never to underestimate desperation. His skin, tanned and weathered, bore the map of a man who had lived outdoors and under fire. He trusted no plan that didn't include contingencies, and tonight he was building contingencies out of ruins. Rex padded at his side, limping but unbroken, the Belgian Malinois' lean, powerful body taut beneath his blood-darkened coat. At 7 years old, Rex was past his physical prime, but deep into his mental one, a dog trained to think, to choose, to disobey if the situation demanded it. His ears twitched at every sound, his amber eyes reflecting firelight and loyalty in equal measure. Maya stood opposite them, adjusting the strap of the small pack that held the data drive against her slender back. She looked fragile at first glance, late 20s, narrow shoulders, pale skin still bruised yellow and purple beneath a smear of desert dust. But there was nothing breakable in her eyes anymore. Her dark hair, pulled into a rough knot, revealed a face sharpened by resolve. The terror that had once hollowed her had been replaced by focus. "We split here," Lucas said, his voice low, calm, carrying authority without effort. "You run east along the dry wash, stay off the ridgeline. The tower's 3 miles. You don't stop. You don't look back." Maya swallowed, then nodded. "And you?" "I make noise," he replied simply. He knelt in front of Rex, pressing his forehead briefly to the dog's, his hand firm on the thick fur at Rex's neck. "Stay with me," he murmured, not a command, but a promise. Rex's tail gave a single slow wag. Maya hesitated only a second before turning and running, her boots kicking up soft clouds of dust as she vanished into the dark. Lucas watched until she was gone, then turned toward the base, slipping through a gap in the fence and into the bones of old war. Inside, the base was a maze of low concrete buildings and half-collapsed hangars. Lucas moved with practiced efficiency, scavenging what he needed. Rusted ammo boxes, old fuel drums, lengths of wire, a handful of ancient but still functional fragmentation grenades sealed in grease. His mind worked the way it always did under pressure, calm and cold, cataloging resources and threats. He rigged charges with steady hands despite the tremor creeping into his wounded arm, setting traps designed not just to kill, but to confuse, to slow, to force the enemy into mistakes. The first helicopter announced itself with a distant thump, the sound growing louder until the air itself seemed to vibrate. Its searchlight cut through the darkness, washing over the base in blinding white arcs. Lucas fired 3 shots into the air from a rooftop, deliberately sloppy, a challenge and an invitation. "Come on," he muttered, his lips curling into something that might have been a smile. The response was immediate. Sirens wailed in the distance, engines roared, and the helicopter banked hard, circling lower. The corrupted commander emerged soon after, stepping from a black-armored SUV with the confidence of a man who believed the desert belonged to him. Captain Andrew Kessler was in his late 40s, tall and broad, his once athletic build softened by years behind a desk and the comfort of unchecked power. His hair was iron gray, cut regulation short, his beard thick and meticulously groomed, framing a face hardened by cynicism rather than combat. He wore his authority like armor, barking orders with a voice that carried, his men snapping to attention out of fear rather than respect. Years earlier, Kessler had been an exemplary officer until a failed operation and a quiet cover-up taught him that survival in the system depended on loyalty to the wrong people. Tonight, his eyes burned with the need to finish what he had started, to erase the problem Lucas represented. The first explosion tore through the base's eastern hangar, a chain reaction of fuel drums erupting in fire and shockwave. The blast threw men off their feet, shattered windows, and lit the night sky in orange and black. Lucas moved as the chaos bloomed, firing controlled bursts from cover, forcing the pursuing units to scatter. Grenades detonated in tight corridors, concussive waves slamming into concrete and flesh alike. Rex darted through smoke and debris, a silent blur, bringing men down with precision strikes to arms and throats, never lingering, always moving. The helicopter swooped lower, its mounted guns spitting tracers that chewed into the ground around Lucas. He ducked, rolled, came up firing at the tail assembly with grim patience. The third burst hit true. Sparks flew, metal screamed, and the aircraft lurched, its pilot fighting controls that no longer obeyed. It clipped the edge of a hangar and went down in a fireball that shook the base to its foundations. Lucas staggered as the concussion slammed into him, pain flaring through his shoulder and down his spine. He dropped to one knee, breathing hard, the world narrowing. Rex was there instantly, pressing against him, grounding him. "Not yet," Lucas rasped, pushing himself up. Kessler advanced through the smoke, shouting, his men thinning, discipline fraying. "You think you've won?" he yelled, raising his rifle. "You're just another body in the sand." Lucas stepped into the open, blood-soaked, exhausted, but unbroken. "I've been worse things than dead," he replied, and fired. The final clash was brutal and close, a collision of will more than bullets. Rex launched himself at Kessler, jaws locking onto the man's forearm with bone-crushing force. Kessler screamed, firing wildly, his shots tearing into concrete as Lucas closed the distance and struck him down, the fight ending in the grit and blood of the desert floor. As Lucas stood over the fallen commander, chest heaving, the sound of rotors filled the air again. Different this time, deeper, disciplined. Federal helicopters descended, floodlights blazing, agents fast roping into the compound, with weapons trained and voices sharp, authoritative. Lucas let his rifle drop, his strength finally giving out as Rex leaned against his leg, both of them held upright by stubborn refusal to fall. The desert fell silent under federal command, and the long night ended not with a gunshot, but with the snap of handcuffs and the knowledge that the hunt was over. Morning came to the desert without ceremony, a thin pale line on the horizon that widened into fire, washing the abandoned base in light that felt almost unreal after the violence of the night. Lucas Hale woke on a stretcher with the taste of iron in his mouth, and the low mechanical hum of a medevac helicopter fading into the distance. His first instinct was situational awareness. He turned his head despite the pain, dark eyes scanning, body tense beneath the bandages. At 34, Lucas was a man shaped by discipline and consequence, tall at just over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and powerfully built. His muscles lean rather than showy, earned through years of operational training rather than vanity. His black hair had been cut down to regulation length, now streaked with gray dust, and a short beard framed a face defined by sharp angles and deep-set eyes that rarely betrayed emotion. The sun revealed the map of scars across his hands and forearms, pale lines against tan skin, each one a chapter of a life spent moving through danger. A Navy corpsman, young and sandy-haired, checked his vitals with professional detachment, offering a brief nod of approval. Nearby, federal agents moved with controlled efficiency, their presence calm rather than aggressive, the quiet confidence of authority that did not need to shout. Lucas exhaled slowly, the tension easing from his shoulders for the first time in days, because he understood what this scene meant. The hunt was over, and it had ended on his terms. Rex lay a few feet away on a thermal blanket, the Belgian Malinois' powerful body finally at rest. Even injured, Rex was an impressive animal, his coat a mix of sable and black, eyes sharp with intelligence, despite the exhaustion weighing his movements. At 7 years old, his muzzle showed the first hints of gray, a mark of years spent in service. A thick bandage wrapped his hind leg, stained but clean, and his chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. When Lucas shifted, Rex lifted his head immediately, tail thumping once against the ground, a simple gesture that carried more loyalty than any spoken oath. Lucas reached out, fingers brushing the dog's fur, grounding himself in that familiar presence. He had learned long ago that Rex was more than a tool or a partner. He was an anchor, a living reminder that trust could survive even in the worst conditions. By mid-morning, the desert base had transformed into a controlled crime scene. Evidence markers dotted the sand like strange flowers, and the wreckage of the helicopter lay cordoned off, its twisted metal glinting under the sun. Captain Andrew Kessler was led past in handcuffs, his once imposing frame slumped, the arrogance stripped from his expression. He avoided Lucas's gaze, his eyes hollow, a man finally confronted by the weight of his choices. Lucas watched him go, without satisfaction or hatred, only a quiet acknowledgement that justice, when it came, was often smaller and sadder than people imagined. Special Agent Rebecca Monroe approached, her stride confident, posture straight. Monroe was in her early 40s, tall and lean, with ash blonde hair pulled into a severe bun, and a face lined not by age but by years of calculated stress. Her eyes were steel gray, sharp and observant, and her tailored field jacket sat neatly over a body that radiated control. She had built her career dismantling organized corruption, and it showed in the way she spoke, measured, precise, without wasted words. "Mr. Hale," she said, offering a hand he accepted after a moment's hesitation. Her grip was firm, professional. "Your actions prevented further loss of life and preserved critical evidence. I won't insult you with platitudes." Lucas gave a faint nod. "Just doing my job," he replied, though they both knew it went far beyond that. Monroe glanced toward Rex. "Your dog?" "My partner," Lucas corrected, his voice even but edged with something immovable. A hint of a smile touched Monroe's lips. "Of course." Maya arrived at the base later that day under federal escort, and Lucas recognized her before she reached him by the way she moved. Still careful, still guarding her ribs, but no longer afraid. She had showered and changed, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders, revealing a slender neck and the faint bruise still shadowing her jaw. Maya was not tall, barely 5'6", her build slight, but her presence had changed fundamentally. Where fear had once sharpened her features, purpose now did. Her eyes, a deep brown almost black in the sunlight, were steady, focused, and when she looked at Lucas, there was no longer desperation there, only gratitude and resolve. "They took everything," she said quietly, sitting on the edge of a crate beside him. "The data, the backups, the names, it's already moving up the chain." Lucas studied her for a moment, seeing not a victim but a survivor. "Good," he said. "Make sure it sticks." She nodded. "I will." Later, in a debriefing tent that smelled of canvas and coffee, Maya gave her formal statement, her voice steady as she detailed the corruption, the violence, the attempted execution that had nearly buried her alive. The agents listened, recorded, verified. By the time she finished, the scope of the investigation had expanded beyond the desert, beyond the county, into a network that would take months, perhaps years, to fully dismantle. Maya signed the last page with a hand that no longer shook, officially becoming a federal witness, protected but forever changed. When she stepped back into the sunlight, she felt lighter, as if the desert itself had released its grip on her. The days that followed blurred into a sequence of closures. Charges were filed. Arrests were made. News crews arrived in waves, their cameras hungry for faces and sound bites, for heroes and villains they could package neatly for the public. Lucas refused them all. He gave his statement, shook the necessary hands, and declined every interview with the same polite, unyielding phrase, "No comment." Fame, he understood, was a different kind of trap, one he had no interest in testing. Instead, he focused on recovery, on physical therapy for his shoulder, on ensuring Rex received the best care available. When Rex was officially awarded a commendation for valor, the small ceremony was held quietly, away from cameras. The medal looked absurdly small against the dog's broad chest, but the meaning behind it mattered. Rex sat at attention, tail sweeping the floor once in restrained excitement, while Lucas stood beside him in uniform, posture perfect, expression unreadable until the end. When he knelt and pressed his forehead briefly to Rex's, whispering words meant for no one else. The scar on Rex's leg would never fully fade, a reminder etched in flesh of the price of loyalty, but it did not slow him, and it did not diminish his spirit. When Lucas returned to his unit, there was no parade, no speeches. Just a quiet acknowledgement from men and women who understood exactly what he had carried and what he had put down. He resumed training, his routine as disciplined as ever, but something within him had shifted. The desert had stripped away illusions he hadn't realized he still carried, leaving behind a clarity that surprised him. Weeks later, when Maya asked to see him one last time before leaving the state under her new identity, he agreed without hesitation. They met at dawn on a ridge overlooking the desert, the air cool and clean, the sky bleeding from indigo to gold. Maya wore simple clothes, her hair tied back, her face calm. Lucas stood beside her, hands resting loosely at his sides, Rex seated between them, alert and content. They did not speak at first. Words felt unnecessary in the presence of that rising sun, of the land that had tried to kill them and failed. Finally, Maya turned to him. "You didn't have to stay," she said softly. Lucas looked out at the horizon, his profile hard but peaceful. "We never leave anyone behind," he replied, the creed as natural to him as breathing. She smiled, a real one, unburdened. Rex shifted, leaning into Lucas's leg, a solid living weight. As the sun crested the ridge, bathing them in light, Lucas felt something he hadn't in a long time. Not relief, not triumph, but a quiet certainty. They had survived. They had won. And more importantly, they had remained human in a place that had tried to turn them into something else. The desert stretched endlessly before them, no longer a battlefield, but a horizon. And together they watched the day begin. In the darkest places where violence, fear, and betrayal seem absolute, there is always a quiet miracle waiting to be seen. Sometimes it is not a divine light from the sky, but the moment a person chooses to protect instead of destroy, to stay human instead of becoming the monster the world expects. Lucas survived not because he was the strongest or the most lethal, but because he held on to loyalty, discipline, and compassion when everything else was stripped away. That is the real miracle, when the soul remains intact after walking through hell. This story is not only about war, corruption, or survival in the desert. It is about everyday life. Each of us faces our own battles: pressure, fear, injustice, loneliness, or exhaustion that no one else can see. Like Lucas, Maya, and Rex, we are tested not by how hard life hits us, but by what we choose to protect when it does. Even in ordinary days, courage can be quiet. Kindness can be an act of defiance. Faith can be the strength that carries us one more step forward when we feel buried and unable to breathe. If this story touched you, let it be a reminder that miracles do not always roar. Sometimes they walk beside us, sometimes they wait for us to stand up again, and sometimes they appear through the people who refuse to abandon us. Carry that awareness into your daily life. Be the reason someone else believes there is still good in the world. If you found meaning in this story, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts or your own experiences. Your voice matters. And if you want more stories about courage, survival, and the human spirit, don't forget to like, subscribe, and support the channel so this community can keep growing. May God bless you, protect you, and give you strength in your battles, both seen and unseen. May peace walk with you, and may light always find you, even after the longest night.